She was judged not by the strength of her character, but by the simplicity of her clothes. She was dismissed not for a lack of worth, but for a lack of adornment. They saw a woman in a plain wool dress and worn leather boots, and saw nothing. They could not see the continents she had crossed, the lives she had touched, or the silent, immense power she held, a power that was about to bring their gilded world to its knees. The Æthelgard Elysian retreat did not sit upon the mountain, it commanded it. Perched high in the snow-dusted peaks of the Colorado Rockies, it was less a building and more a monument to obscene wealth, a fortress of privilege accessible only by a private, heated road or the whisper-quiet blades of a helicopter. Its walls were vast panes of tempered glass, drinking in the panoramic vista of jagged peaks and endless sky. Inside, the air itself felt curated, thick with the scent of white pine, eucalyptus, and the unspoken aroma of money old, new, and powerful. The silence here was a commodity. It was a deep, resonant hush, broken only by the soft crackle of a grand fireplace, the quiet clink of porcelain teacups, and the rustle of cashmere against Italian leather. Guests, draped in identical dove-gray robes, moved with a languid grace, their faces serene behind layers of expensive serums, and the detached calm that comes from having every conceivable need met before it can fully form as a thought. This was a sanctuary for the 1% of the 1%, a place where the chaos of the outside world was not just forgotten, but rendered entirely irrelevant. Into this temple of sterile opulence, Annalise Vance entered. She did not arrive in a chauffeured black car or a sleek helicopter. She stepped out of a modest, all-wheel drive rental, the kind used by locals to navigate the treacherous mountain passes. The blast of frigid air that followed her through the heavy, soundproofed glass doors felt like an intrusion, a brief, unwelcome reminder of the raw, untamed nature that lay just beyond the retreat's climate-controlled perfection. Her appearance was the second intrusion. She wore a simple, cream-colored wool dress that fell just below her knees. It was elegant in its cut, but devoid of any brand or logo that would signal its value. Her boots, practical and made of dark, oiled leather, were scuffed at the toes and bore the faint, dried remnants of mud around the soles ghosts of a world far removed from Æthelgard's polished marble floors. A thick, hand-knit scarf was wrapped around her neck, its deep forest green, a stark contrast to the spa's palette of beige, white, and muted gold. Her long brown hair was swept back into a simple, loose braid, and her face, though possessing a natural, striking beauty, was utterly bare of makeup. There were faint lines of fatigue around her hazel eyes, a weariness that spoke not of late-night parties but of genuine, soul-deep exhaustion. She carried no purse, no glittering clutch, no status symbol to announce her arrival. In her hand, she held only her phone and a single car key. Her presence created a subtle but immediate ripple in the room's placid atmosphere. A woman reclining on a chaise lounge, a gold-infused mask shimmering on her face, lowered her magazine just enough to peer over the top, her eyes narrowing. Two men, their multi-thousand-dollar watches glinting as they gestured, paused their conversation, their gazes sweeping over Annalise with a shared, dismissive curiosity. The whispers started almost instantly, soft as the falling snow outside but sharp enough to cut. "Staff?" one voice murmured, laced with confusion. "No, the uniforms are gray," another corrected. "Perhaps she's lost. Looking for the public lodge, maybe." Annalise heard them. She was not deaf to their judgment, nor was she immune to the sting of their condescension. But years spent in far more challenging environments had forged a shield of profound composure around her heart. The hushed critiques of the wealthy were nothing compared to the desperate cries of a village facing a flood, or the solemn silence of a makeshift clinic running out of supplies. She had just returned from 2 months in a remote region of the Andes, overseeing the installation of a water purification system her foundation had funded. The memory of the children's grateful smiles, of the elders' tears of joy, was a warm, protective cloak against the cold appraisal of this room. Still, a quiet ache settled in her chest. She had come here seeking rest, a few days of quiet solitude to recharge a spirit worn thin by the world's harsh realities. She had hoped to find a place of peace, but instead, she had walked into a different kind of wilderness, one of prejudice and superficiality. Her worn boots made a soft, squeaking sound against the gleaming floor, an offense against the sacred hush of the lobby. Each step of the long walk toward the reception desk felt amplified, a drumbeat announcing her otherness. The desk itself was a monolith of white marble, behind which stood a young woman who seemed as polished and severe as her surroundings. Her name tag, a sliver of gold, read Serafina Dubois. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek, impossibly tight chignon. Her lipstick was a slash of defiant crimson, and her eyes, the color of cold slate, held a look of bored, practiced disdain. She was the gatekeeper, the first line of defense against anything or anyone deemed unworthy of Ethelgard. Annalise offered a small, tired smile as she approached. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice soft but clear. Serafina did not return the smile. Her eyes performed a swift, brutal inventory, starting at Annalise's scuffed boots and traveling with deliberate slowness up the simple wool dress to her unadorned face. The assessment took no more than 2 seconds, but the verdict was clear and damning. "Can I help you?" Serafina asked. The tone was not one of assistance, but of challenge. It implied a different question entirely. "What are you doing here?" "Yes, thank you," Annalise replied, her calm unwavering. "I have a reservation. The name is Annalise Vance." A flicker of something disbelief, perhaps even amusement, danced in Serafina's eyes. She turned to her computer terminal, her posture radiating an exaggerated sense of duty. Her blood-red nails, perfectly manicured, tapped on the keyboard with a slow, deliberate rhythm designed to communicate her annoyance. The lounge behind Annalise had grown quieter now, the whispers ceasing as more guests turned to watch the unfolding scene with mild interest, as if it were a piece of unexpected theater. "Vance," Serafina repeated, drawing the name out as if it tasted foreign and unpleasant. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her head tilted. Then, she let out a theatrical sigh. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that was more poisonous than any venom. "I don't seem to have a reservation under that name." "That's strange," Annalise said, her fingers tightening slightly around her phone. "I booked it online 2 weeks ago. I have the confirmation email right here. Perhaps you could check again?" She held up her phone, the screen glowing with the booking details. Serafina barely glanced at it, waving a dismissive hand. "Our system is flawless, madam," she stated, her tone growing colder. "If your name is not in it, you do not have a reservation. The public ski lodge is another 5 miles down the mountain. I'm sure they can accommodate you." The insult was clear, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She was being cast out, categorized and dismissed as someone who belonged down the mountain with the common folk. The heat of humiliation pricked at Annalise's cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the roaring fireplace. A few guests in the lounge exchanged smug smiles. One woman let out a soft, cruel titter. Annalise took a slow, steadying breath, refusing to let them see her falter. "I am quite certain this is the correct place," she insisted, keeping her voice even. "It was booked under Annalise Vance. Could you please just double-check the spelling? V-A-N-C-E?" Serafina's lips curled into a sneer. "I am quite capable of spelling," she snapped, her professional veneer finally cracking to reveal the raw arrogance beneath. "As I said, there is nothing here. Ethelgard is an exclusive retreat with a very selective clientele. Membership is typically by invitation only. We don't get walk-ins." The final word was delivered with such withering contempt that it seemed to hang in the air, a tangible thing. Annalise was no longer just a potential guest with a booking error. She was a walk-in, a trespasser, an impurity in their pristine environment. The audience in the lounge was now fully engaged. The pretense of ignoring the confrontation was dropped. This was better than any magazine. This was live entertainment. A man in a tailored blazer leaned toward his companion. "Probably some social media influencer trying to sneak in for a photo," he whispered, just loud enough for Annalise to hear. "Pathetic." His friend chuckled. "Look at her boots. I doubt she could even afford a cup of tea here." The laughter, though muffled, felt like a physical blow. Annalise's calm resolve began to fray at the edges. She had faced down warlords and negotiated with corrupt officials. She had comforted grieving mothers and held starving children. And yet, the casual, baseless cruelty of these people was beginning to find the cracks in her armor. It wasn't the rejection that hurt. It was the glee they took in it. It was the stark realization that in their eyes, her worth as a human being was measured solely by the price tag of her attire. She kept her gaze fixed on Serafina, refusing to give the onlookers the satisfaction of seeing her turn. "There must be a misunderstanding," she said, her voice a little tighter now. "My payment was processed. The full amount for a 5-night stay in a summit suite." The mention of a summit suite, one of Aethelgard's most expensive accommodations, only seemed to harden Serafina's suspicion into outright hostility. The idea that this woman, this drab, unimpressive creature, could afford such a luxury was not just unlikely. It was offensive. "That's impossible," Serafina said flatly. "Our summit suites are reserved for our royal tier members." "And you, madam," she paused, letting her eyes once again rake over Annalise's form, "are clearly not a member." Annalise stood her ground, the marble floor beneath her feet feeling as cold and unforgiving as the faces around her. She was trapped in a surreal nightmare, where logic and truth held no currency. Her confirmation email, the transaction record from her bank, none of it mattered. The only evidence they would accept was the evidence she did not possess. A designer handbag, a diamond bracelet, the unmistakable aura of exorbitant wealth. She felt a profound weariness wash over her, a fatigue that went far beyond her recent travels. It was the weariness of fighting a battle she hadn't known. She would have to wage a battle against an impenetrable wall of prejudice. She had come here to heal, but the place itself was toxic. "Fine," Annalise said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The fight had gone out of her. The quiet sanctuary she had dreamed of had revealed itself to be a shallow, gilded cage, and she no longer had any desire to enter it. "If you won't help me, then there's nothing more to say." A triumphant smirk played on Serafina's lips. She had won. She had successfully protected the sanctum from an unworthy intruder. "I'm glad we understand each other," she said, already turning away, dismissing Annalise as if she had ceased to exist. "Have a pleasant day." Elsewhere, Annalise turned to leave, the weight of a dozen pairs of smug, judgmental eyes on her back. The short walk from the reception desk to the grand entrance felt like a mile-long walk of shame. The silent, towering glass walls seemed to mock her, reflecting her simple dress and tired face back at her from 100 different angles. The opulent space, which had at first seemed merely intimidating, now felt suffocating, its beauty tainted by the ugliness of its inhabitants. As she reached for the handle of the great wooden door, a final, parting shot came from the lounge. "Don't forget to take a picture for your blog," a woman called out, her voice high and shrill with laughter. A chorus of snickers followed. Annalise paused, her hand hovering over the cold metal. She did not turn around. She did not offer a retort. She simply straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and pushed the door open. The icy wind rushed in to meet her, a bracing, honest force that felt cleaner and more welcoming than the perfumed, poisonous air she was leaving behind. The door swung shut behind her with a heavy, final thud, sealing her out back into the real world. The silent judgment of the mountain was a far kinder companion than the vocal judgment of the people inside. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound absorbed by the falling snow. For a long moment, Annalise simply stood there, an island of stillness in the swirling white. The wind, sharp and unforgiving at this altitude, whipped a loose strand of hair across her face and bit at the exposed skin of her neck. It was a brutal, honest, cold, a stark contrast to the calculated cruelty she had just faced. Snowflakes, delicate and crystalline, landed on her eyelashes and melted on the warmth of her cheeks like cold tears. She looked back at the Aethelgard Elysian retreat. Through the vast, pristine glass walls, she could see the scene continuing as if she had never been there. The guests had returned to their hushed conversations, their faces animated with the fresh gossip of her dismissal. She could see Serafina at the desk, laughing with a guest, her crimson lips forming a smug, satisfied smile. They were warm, they were comfortable, they were secure in their gilded world. and she was out here, in the storm. A wave of pure, hot anger, an emotion she rarely allowed herself, surged through her. It wasn't just about a reservation. It was about the principle. It was about the casual, reflexive cruelty of people so insulated by their wealth that they had forgotten basic human decency. They had not just denied her a room she had paid for, they had denied her dignity. They had judged, condemned, and sentenced her in a matter of minutes, based on nothing more than the fabric of her dress and the wear on her boots. Her first instinct was to walk away, to get in her rented car and drive down the mountain, leaving this monument to arrogance to fester in its own exclusivity. But then she thought of the people she fought for every day, people who were dismissed, ignored, and deemed worthless by systems of power far more formidable than a snooty spa receptionist. To walk away now would feel like a betrayal, not just of herself, but of them. Her strength was not in enduring injustice silently, it was in confronting it, calmly and firmly. She would not let them win so easily. Taking a deep, centering breath that filled her lungs with the frigid mountain air, she turned around. Her boots crunched in the fresh powder as she walked back to the entrance, her resolve hardening with each step. When she pushed the heavy door open for the second time, a collective look of shock and annoyance rippled through the lobby. It was as if a ghost had returned to haunt them. Serafina's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure indignation. How dare this woman challenge her authority? How dare she disturb the peace again? "I believe we are finished here," Serafina said, her voice sharp as broken glass. She was already reaching for the phone, presumably to call security. "I am not finished," Annalise stated, her voice quiet but carrying a new weight of authority that made the receptionist pause. "You have refused to honor a paid reservation, and you have refused to even look at my confirmation. I would like to speak to your manager." The request, simple and standard in any other establishment, was received as a grave insult here. It implied that Serafina was incompetent, that her judgment was flawed. The guests began to murmur again, their amusement turning to irritation. This persistent woman was ruining the ambiance. Before Serafina could deliver another venomous retort, a smooth baritone voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem, Serafina?" A man emerged from a corridor behind the reception desk. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the car Annalise had rented. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his face bore the chiseled, handsome features of a man accustomed to being in control. His smile was polished, practiced, and did not come anywhere near his cold, calculating gray eyes. A gold nameplate on his lapel identified him as Landon Croft, executive director. Serafina's expression immediately shifted from arrogance to a kind of fawning deference. "Mr. Croft, my apologies for the disturbance," she began, gesturing dismissively toward Annalise. "This individual was just leaving. She seems to be under the mistaken impression that she has a reservation with us." Landon Croft's gaze slid over to Annalise. It was not a glance, it was a dissection. His eyes, like a hawk's, took in every detail: the simple wool of her dress, the practical knit of her scarf, the weariness in her face, and finally, the scuffed leather of her boots. He saw everything and understood nothing. "I see," he said, his voice a low, condescending purr. He stepped out from behind the desk, his polished shoes making no sound on the marble floor. He moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a shark circling its prey. He did not address Annalise directly at first, instead speaking to the room at large, as if she were an object for discussion. "Ethelgard is more than a retreat," he began, his voice resonating with rehearsed importance. "It is a curated experience. We have a duty to our esteemed guests to maintain a certain standard, an atmosphere of absolute tranquility and aesthetic harmony." He finally stopped in front of Annalise, standing uncomfortably close. He looked down at her, his smile tightening. "And your presence, madam, is creating a certain aesthetic dissonance." The insult was more sophisticated than Serafina's, but infinitely more cruel. He was telling her that she, in her very being, was an eyesore, a disruption to the beauty and harmony of his perfect world. Annalise refused to be intimidated. She met his cold gaze directly. "My presence would not be an issue if your staff had done their job correctly. she said, her voice steady. I have a confirmed and fully paid booking for a summit suite. All I am asking is for you to honor it. She held up her phone again. The confirmation email displayed clearly. The details are right here. Landon Croft did not even deign to look at the screen. He let out a soft, pitying chuckle, a sound more insulting than any shout. My dear woman, he said, clasping his hands behind his back, anyone can fabricate an email. Or, more likely, you found some sort of third-party discount voucher online, which, I can assure you, is not valid here. Our system, as my colleague stated, is infallible. You are not in it. Therefore, you do not belong here. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was nevertheless loud enough for those nearby to hear. Let me offer you some advice. Go back down the mountain. Find a place more suited to your circumstances. You are embarrassing yourself. The dam of Annalise's composure finally broke, not with a flood of tears or a torrent of anger, but with a single, sharp crack. My circumstances? She repeated, her voice laced with an incredulous chill. And what do you imagine those are? Landon straightened up, his smile vanishing completely. His patience was at an end. The performance was over. My imagination is not the issue here, he said, his voice turning to steel. Your refusal to leave is. You have now become a trespasser. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod toward the entrance. A burly man in a dark suit, who had been standing impassively by the door, began to move toward them. He was built like a refrigerator, his face a mask of grim professionalism. He was a human wall, and he was coming for her. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Annalise's resolve. The situation was spiraling out of control. It was no longer a dispute, it was an eviction. The guests were now openly staring, some even raising their phones to discreetly record the spectacle. She was their afternoon diversion, the poor woman who didn't know her place. This is absurd, she said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. I have done nothing wrong. You have disrupted the peace and refused to leave private property, Landon countered, his voice booming with authority. He turned to the security guard, who had now reached them. Marcus, please escort this woman from the premises, and ensure she does not return. Marcus, the guard, grunted in acknowledgement. He didn't touch her, but his sheer proximity was a physical threat. He stood beside her, waiting, his presence a silent, overwhelming command. This way, ma'am, he growled, his voice a low rumble. The humiliation was absolute. It was a searing, physical thing that burned in her chest and climbed up her throat. To be publicly shamed, to be treated like a criminal, to be physically removed under the gleeful eyes of strangers, it was a violation far deeper than a simple rejection. Her feet felt like lead as she turned and walked toward the exit for the second time. Marcus followed a step behind her, his heavy footsteps on the marble, a grim echo of her own. As she passed the lounge, Landon's voice rang out one last time, a final twist of the knife. Let this be a lesson to all, he announced to the room. The standards of Ethelgard are absolute and will always be protected. A smattering of soft, approving applause broke out from some of the guests. Annalise's shoulders stayed square, her back ramrod straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her slump in defeat. Her dignity was the only thing she had left, and she clutched it like a shield. The great glass doors hissed open, and the icy wind blasted her face once more. This time, Marcus stepped outside with her, his hand gesturing firmly down the snow-covered path toward the parking area. Keep walking, he ordered, his tone, leaving no room for argument. She did as he said, her boots sinking into the snow, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She didn't look back until she reached her car. When she did, she saw Marcus still standing at the entrance, arms crossed, a sentinel ensuring the purity of the sanctuary was not breached again. The doors slid shut, and the golden, warm light of the Ethelgard Elysian retreat was sealed away once more. It looked like a fairy tale castle perched on the mountaintop. But Annalise Vance now knew the truth. It was a place with a hollow heart, a beautiful facade hiding a deep and ugly rot. And as she stood there, shivering in the encroaching twilight, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would not let this injustice stand. Annalise sat in the driver's seat of the rental car, the engine off, the silence inside the cabin, a stark contrast to the howling wind outside. For a long time, she didn't move. She simply stared through the snow-streaked windshield at the golden fortress on the hill, its lights glowing with a warm, mocking invitation. The humiliation had cooled now, crystallizing into something harder, clearer, and far more dangerous. Resolve. The cold was beginning to seep through the car's insulation, a creeping numbness that started in her fingertips and toes. It mirrored the feeling in her heart. She was beyond anger, beyond the sting of personal insult. What remained was a profound, icy clarity. Landon Croft and his staff hadn't just been rude. They had been gatekeepers of a system that thrived on exclusion and prejudice. They had judged her unworthy based on a shallow, materialistic checklist, and in doing so, they had revealed the moral bankruptcy at the core of their gilded world. Ethelgard wasn't a sanctuary, it was a symptom of a sickness, and she, unknowingly, held a cure. Her hands, steady despite the cold, reached for her phone. Her thumb moved across the screen, her movements deliberate and precise. She didn't call her lawyers. She didn't compose a furious email to a corporate complaints department. Such actions were the tools of those who fought from the outside. She had no need for them. She opened a secure messaging app, a simple, encrypted line of communication she shared with only one person. Her fingers typed a short, simple message to her husband, Silas Thorne. There was no mention of the insults, no description of the public shaming, no hint of the emotional turmoil churning within her. The words were calm, understated, and for that reason, infinitely more potent. There was an issue with the booking. My plans have changed. Could you arrange an earlier flight? She hit send. A single checkmark appeared, then a second. Delivered. Read. Less than a minute later, a reply came through. Just 3 words. On my way. Annalise let out a slow, shuddering breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cold headrest. On my way? It was a promise, a threat, a declaration of intent. The world did not shift when Silas Thorne spoke. It rearranged itself. She started the car, the engine rumbling to life, and drove away from Ethelgard, not in retreat, but in strategic withdrawal. The battle was over, but the war was about to begin. The next morning dawned crisp and blindingly bright. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, covering the world in a blanket of pristine, untouched white. The sunlight glittered on the diamond-dusted peaks, and inside the Ethelgard Elysian retreat, the atmosphere of immaculate calm had been restored. The unpleasantness of the previous day had been forgotten, a minor footnote in the grand narrative of luxury. Landon Croft strode through the lobby, a contented king surveying his domain. He adjusted his silk tie, the picture of satisfaction. He had handled the situation with the trespassing woman perfectly, reinforcing the retreat's standards and providing his guests with a little frisson of drama to recount later. His actions, he was certain, would be praised by the board. At the front desk, Seraphina Dubois was radiating smug confidence. She recounted the story to a new guest, a European countess, embellishing the details to paint herself as a heroic guardian of decorum. "You should have seen her boots," she whispered conspiratorially, her voice dripping with disdain, utterly ghastly. "I knew the moment I saw her she didn't belong." The countess laughed, a sound like tiny, tinkling bells. The order of their world was secure. It was precisely at 10:03 a.m. that the first sign of disruption appeared. It wasn't a sight, but a sound, a low, distant rumble that vibrated through the floor to ceiling glass windows. It was a sound that did not belong in the sacred quiet of the mountains. It was the sound of thunder on a perfectly clear day. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Guests in the heated outdoor pools paused, their champagne flutes hovering mid-air as they squinted toward the impossibly blue sky. The rumble grew steadily, deepening into a powerful, soul-shaking roar that seemed to make the very air tremble. And then they saw it. Descending from the heavens like a predatory bird was a private jet. But it wasn't just any jet. It was a Gulfstream G800, the latest and most advanced model. Its body painted a menacing matte charcoal gray that seemed to absorb the light. It moved with a terrifying grace, its engines screaming a defiant challenge to the mountain's silence. As it banked for its final approach toward the retreat's private airstrip, the morning sun glinted off a subtle, silver logo on its tail, a stylized T intertwined with a lightning bolt. The logo of Thorn Industries. A wave of whispers rippled through the retreat, spreading faster than a wildfire. Is that a G-800? That's Silas Thorn's jet. The Silas Thorn. What is he doing here? He's not on the guest list. At the reception desk, the color drained from Seraphina's face. Landon Croft froze mid-sentence, his charming smile collapsing into a slack-jawed expression of disbelief. The air in the lobby crackled with a sudden, palpable tension. This was not a guest. This was an event. Minutes later, the second wave of the invasion arrived. A convoy of 3 identical blacked-out SUVs came gliding up the private road, their tires crunching on the snow with military precision. They pulled up to the main entrance, and men in sharp, dark suits and earpieces emerged, their movements swift and coordinated. They didn't enter. They formed a silent, imposing perimeter around the doors, their eyes scanning the area with unnerving focus. The guests were now pressed against the glass, their languid calm shattered, their faces a mixture of awe, excitement, and a dawning sense of dread. The tranquil sanctuary had become the epicenter of something powerful and unknown. The great glass doors hissed open. Silas Thorn stepped inside. The room fell into a silence so profound it was like a physical pressure. He was taller than he appeared in photographs, his presence filling the vast space with an aura of quiet, absolute authority. He wore a dark navy cashmere overcoat, exquisitely tailored but devoid of any ostentatious branding. His dark hair was lightly dusted with silver at the temples, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were as cold and sharp as the alpine wind. At 6'3", he didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His stillness was enough. Behind him walked a single aide, a woman with a severe expression, carrying a sleek leather portfolio. Every eye followed him as he crossed the marble floor. His footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, each one a hammer blow against the fragile peace of the room. He walked past the gawking guests without a flicker of acknowledgement. His focus was singular, his destination absolute. Landon Croft, jolted from his stupor, rushed forward, his face contorted into a desperate, servile smile. "Mr. Thorn, what an unexpected honor," he gushed, extending a trembling hand. Welcome to Aethelgard. We had no idea you were coming. How can we possibly be of service?" Silas Thorn did not slow his pace. He did not acknowledge the outstretched hand. He walked past Landon as if he were a piece of furniture, his cold gaze fixed directly on the reception desk and on the terrified young woman standing behind it. He stopped directly in front of Seraphina. The room held its breath. "My wife was here yesterday," he said. His voice was not loud, but it was low and precise, cutting through the silence like a diamond blade. "Her name is Annalise Vance. She had a confirmed reservation. You turned her away." It was not a question, it was a statement of fact. Seraphina's face, already pale, turned a ghostly shade of white. Her crimson lips trembled as she struggled to form words. I don't recall, sir," she stammered, her eyes darting frantically toward Landon for help. Landon hurried to her side, his usual smoothness replaced by a frantic, sweating panic. "Mr. Thorn, there must be a terrible misunderstanding, a mistake in the system, perhaps. If you'll just allow me—" "There is no misunderstanding," Silas interrupted, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even colder. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. The entire room seemed to lean forward in anticipation. He did not produce a weapon. He did not produce a phone. He produced a single, slim card made of matte black metal. It looked heavy, substantial. He placed it on the marble countertop with a soft but definitive click that echoed in the deathly quiet room. The card bore a simple, elegant inscription in silver lettering, Annalise Vance Thorn. Landon and Seraphina stared at it, their minds struggling to process the hyphenated name. And then, Silas used his index finger to slowly, deliberately, flip the card over. On the reverse side, etched beneath the Aethelgard logo, were 5 words that shattered their world. Founding partner, Aethelgard Global Holdings. For a full 10 seconds, the world stopped. The only sound in the vast, opulent lobby was the frantic, panicked thumping of two human hearts. The 5 words etched on the back of the black metal card seemed to burn into the air itself, a brand of irrefutable truth that incinerated every lie, every assumption, every smug certainty that had defined the Ethelgard Elysian retreat. Founding partner, Ethelgard Global Holdings. Landencroft's face, moments before a mask of composed authority, crumbled. The blood drained from it so completely that he looked like a statue carved from chalk. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The smooth, rehearsed lines he used to navigate his world had utterly abandoned him. He stared at the name on the card, Annalise Vance Thorne, and then his eyes, wide with dawning horror, lifted to meet Silas's. He saw no mercy there. Beside him, Serafina made a small, strangled sound, like a wounded animal. Her carefully constructed facade of bored superiority shattered into a million pieces. The crimson lipstick suddenly looked garish against her deathly pale skin. Her hands, which had so dismissively waved Annalise away, were now gripping the edge of the marble counter, as if to keep herself from collapsing. The woman she had mocked, belittled, and cast out into the snow was not just a guest. She was, in a very real sense, her owner. A teacup slipped from the trembling fingers of a guest in the lounge, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that was shockingly loud in the suffocating silence. The spell was broken. A wave of frantic, disbelieving whispers erupted throughout the room. Phones were raised, no longer discreetly, as guests began to openly record the corporate execution that was about to take place. No, Landon finally managed to choke out the word, a pathetic, desperate plea. That's not possible. There must be a mistake. The only mistake, Silas said, his voice dangerously soft, was yours. He gestured to his aide. The woman stepped forward and placed the sleek leather portfolio on the counter beside the black card. She opened it with a crisp snap. Inside were pages of dense, legally binding documents, flagged with colored tabs and marked with signatures. My wife is a silent partner in over a dozen of your international properties, Silas explained, his calm, level tone making the words all the more devastating. She values her privacy, choosing to invest in ventures she believes in without seeking the spotlight. This retreat was one of them. She held a 35% founding stake in this specific location. He paused, letting the weight of that number settle over the room. Or, to be more precise, she did. He tapped a finger on the top document, a freshly signed letter of intent, as of 8 a.m. This morning, Mountain Standard Time, she has initiated the transfer of her entire investment portfolio out of Ethelgard Global Holdings. Every dollar, every share, is being redirected to fund the expansion of your primary competitor, Vitalis Resorts. They are, I'm told, launching a new brand initiative focused on inclusive wellness. Annalise will be heading the advisory board. A collective gasp went through the lounge. This was no longer just a personal drama. It was a seismic event in the world of luxury hospitality. Careers were ending. An empire was cracking. Landon stumbled back a step, his hand flying to his chest as if he'd been physically struck. "Mr. Thorne, please," he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. "I had no idea." "We had no idea. If we had known who she was." "That is the entire point," Silas cut him off, his voice finally taking on an edge of pure, glacial fury. "You shouldn't have to know who she is. You judged a human being's worth based on the price of her clothes. You allowed your staff to mock her. You called security to physically remove her and threw her into a snowstorm. You did this not because she broke a rule, but because she failed to meet your shallow, disgusting aesthetic standard." He leaned forward, his stormy eyes boring into Landon's, then shifting to pin a terrified Serafina in their glare. "You built this place as a temple to wealth, but you have no concept of true value. My wife has spent her life in places you wouldn't dare set foot, helping people you would never deign to look at. The quiet grace and strength she possesses is worth more than every ounce of gold you have plastered on your walls." His words hung in the air, a final, damning indictment. The guests, who had so recently been part of the mocking chorus, now shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away in shame. Others watched with a morbid fascination. The security guard, Marcus, who had been standing impassively by the door, now seemed to shrink, trying to make himself invisible. Silas turned to his aide. "The surveillance footage from yesterday's incident," he said, his voice returning to its calm, businesslike tone. "It has already been delivered to the board. I believe they are ready for us." The aide produced a tablet and swiped the screen. A moment later, a video call connected. In the severe face of a silver-haired man, the CEO of Athelgard Global Holdings appeared, his expression grim. "Landon." "Serafina," the CEO's voice boomed from the tablet speakers, tinny and devoid of any warmth. "Your actions are a disgrace to this brand. They are indefensible. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises." Serafina let out a choked sob, her hands flying to her mouth. "But my career," she wailed, the sound pitiful and hollow. "You should have thought of that yesterday," the CEO replied coldly, before turning his attention to the guard. "Marcus, you are also terminated. Your failure to de-escalate and use professional discretion is a liability we cannot afford." The video call ended. It was over. The public humiliation was complete, a perfect, brutal mirror of the one they had inflicted upon Annalise. Silas Thorne gave one last, sweeping look around the chaotic lobby. He then picked up the black metal card from the counter, holding it between his fingers. "She never needed this to prove who she was," he said quietly, pocketing it. "You needed it to prove who you were, and you failed." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, his aide falling into step behind him. The doors hissed open, and he was gone, leaving a maelstrom of chaos and ruin in his wake. 1 month later, the Athelgard Elysian retreat was a ghost. The private road leading up the mountain was chained off, a closed indefinitely sign hanging from it. The scandal, dubbed Number Athelgard Arrogance online, had gone viral, fueled by the leaked surveillance footage. Bookings were canceled en masse. The brand was irrevocably tarnished. The Golden Fortress was now just a cold, empty shell, its once glowing windows dark and lifeless against the snow. Annalise stood at the bottom of the road, looking up at the shuttered building. Silas was beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. She was wearing a simple, dark green coat and a familiar pair of worn leather boots. She hadn't changed. The world around her had. As they turned to leave, she noticed a figure standing on the corner of the main road in the nearby town, handing out flyers to passing cars. The woman wore the thin, ill-fitting polyester uniform of a budget massage chain. Her hair, no longer in a perfect chignon, was windswept and messy. It was Serafina. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the snowy distance. Annalise saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of deep, burning shame that made Serafina quickly look down at the frozen pavement. Annalise felt no triumph, no smug satisfaction. There was only a quiet, profound sadness for a lesson learned at such a terrible cost. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement, and then she turned away. They walked on, their footsteps leaving fresh tracks in the snow, leaving the shuttered spa and its bitter lessons behind them. Annalise leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, the crisp mountain air feeling clean and full of promise. She had faced the ugliness of prejudice and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. Her quiet grace, a testament to a worth that could never be measured by gold or glamour.